Hello and welcome to my Model Corner project number 12 and the first of the viewer's choice builds. The F4 Phantom received the most votes in our election, but fear not, I'll also be building the next 3 most voted or suggested subjects in succession. This will be my first Italeri kit. I indeed recall the days when the F4 was more prominent in the skies. They often did demonstrations at the Chicago Air Show annually over Lake Michigan when I was a young boy. In fact, in those days they were allowed to break the sound barrier, which is something I miss in this era. It was always amazing to see a sleek jet sweep across the water as if in a silent movie, right across your field of view. And after it had passed, the slow increasing jet noise would follow like an invisible plane, and then a subsequent thunderclap of the sonic boom. This kit is a bit smaller compared to my recent builds. We do have 2 large decal sheets included. As an aside, I wonder where the artist got his idea for the cover art. The instructions only have 7 step blocks, so this should go relatively quickly. We can begin some prep work before we break out the airbrush. The ejection seats, cockpit, and the instrument panels can be removed, and then we can plan out our initial painting strategy. This particular kit cockpit is another one of those mixed molded panel and decal panel combinations. I prefer form details and will only use the decal portions where the molded elements are absent. I'm noticing some deficiencies in the casting of this model. I will point out that there are some minor flash and stray bumps of extra plastic. The recess lines are not uniform in places. Here, on the top, the lines are too shallow and need scribing. I use the dull side of my knife to deepen the lines. Also, there are multiple ejector pin impressions that need filling in. On the outer halves of the intakes, you can see more of those ejector pin marks. While we wait for all that to dry, we can do some work on the lower and upper wings. In the meantime, our filler has dried. These areas can be sanded smooth, but this being a water-soluble putty, we can dab a cotton swab with water and clean up. More aggressive attention can be given to the sections outside the areas we are trying to fill in, while lightening our touch when working those holes or seams. The cotton will fill up with excess putty and need to be changed out from time to time. Since I fat-fingered some zones, a knife can be used to remove the putty in tighter locations. The outer intake halves required thicker putty application due to the deeper holes. We can speed up the removal by using a knife initially, before reverting to the cotton swabs. Before we begin painting, let's put the wings together. There is some warping on the outer portions which will also require us to add filler. This kit is definitely a sculptor's project. We break out the airbrush for our first painting session. I've grouped some parts by common colors to save time and will work the lighter to darker pigments for this sitting. This is a 3/0 brush for the ejection seats. We'll use the colors suggested by the instructions and work our way around the seatbelt harnesses. I whittled down a wooden skewer to a finer point to add the bands to the ejection handle loops. Not a lot of detail to work with here, but it's ready to be installed. Once again, we add masking tape to airbrush in our panels. The detail in the cockpit has very low relief, and using a sanding stick to bring out the details might be hazardous. We can take a more surgical approach and use a knife edge to scrape away the black paint and highlight the features. The aft cockpit forward console has almost no detail, so we must use the decals. In other areas, the kit's decals do not match the raised panels. If you go the decal route, you'll have to remove the outcrop features. For the forward cockpit console, we can scrape away at the dial edges, knobs, and switches to emphasize them. To bring out the display scopes, we can first add a base color of white or other lighter color depending on how bright you want them to appear, and then add the green. The instructions have us attach the cockpit nose gear bay combination to one side of the fuselage. The dry fit here demonstrates the arrangement is a little off. I glued the forward half of the combo, let it dry, and then lightly pressure the aft portion to align with that part of the fuselage half. Adding the halves together creates a very long seam line. We can bond a few inches at a time going along the entire length of the sections to keep them aligned as best as possible to reduce the follow-on putty and sanding work. We can attach the wings now and some fairings. We are ready to add our overspray protection and then begin our exterior paint work. Based on various images of the F4s from the VMFA 333rd, the exterior gray coat is not heavily worn and well maintained. We must tone down the weathering by filling in the main color coat more evenly. When I'm at the point of adding the main color coat on a model, I usually begin questioning whether it's all going to turn out because it doesn't look like much at this stage. I keep my fingers crossed that by the end of the detail and weathering steps it will all have turned around. The exterior for this F4 requires a bit of masking to add other colors such as the aft titanium heat shield and white on the upper flaps. I'll show the beginning stages on the right side of the aircraft where we mask off the borders before adding broad pieces of tape for protection. There are also simple high visibility patterns on this fuselage which can come across better if we take the time to mask and airbrush those in rather than use the decals included in this kit. Our main borders are complete for the starboard side to include the titanium shielding, the flaps, anti-skid pattern, and the nose anti-glare shading. After some touch-ups, we can add some small paint details such as the red marked intake lips before we begin the steps toward our weathering phase. Model builders can have different orders to adding clear coats, detailing, and adding decals. I prefer to start with a lighter coat, then add a slightly heavier coat to the model after about 30 minutes. I then begin my detailing before applying decals in case there is a problem in the application of the weathering that might damage the emblems if I have to adjust the exterior highlights. I will then blend in things such as dirt, soot, and emphasize panel lines to the decal areas. This pastel wash is fairly benign and it does not stain the panels. Therefore, we can add our wash without the concern for being very neat as we apply this detail. We just need to concentrate on ensuring that the panel lines are highlighted. Trace along all the panel lines and hit the corners where two surfaces meet such as the fuselage and the wing root, and the vertical tail to the empennage. After allowing the wash to dry, we can break out our trusty cotton swabs to clean up the excess and leave the stain only in the engraved lines. As always, rub the swabs at an angle to avoid lifting the wash from the panel line. Right angles are the best, but we can go down to 30 degrees without degrading the detail. Still, if we lose too much, we can always reapply more wash. We'll want to add soot and dirty up our heat shield later on, but let's focus on the panel lines for now. As with the right side of the aircraft, we turn our interest to the left side of the Phantom, repeating the detailing and cleaning as before. Significantly, we add detail to the plain white underside of the F4. Even though this is a rough treatment of the black coloring, you can see it emphasizes the panels already into something interesting. There is the option to leave some of this leftover wash on areas to simulate fluid leaks that have been contaminated with dirt that can add to the overall look of the model. For the titanium heat shield, we can dab on some oil paint and then even it out a little more using a cotton swab once again. After the paint is spread out well enough, we can choose panels at random and leave more or less of the oil paint. Returning to the engine nozzles, we can airbrush in some aluminum to lighten and diffuse the darker gunmetal base coat. Here we rub in some black oil paint to simulate the hot exhaust burn marks. Let's go ahead and install the engines now. We can observe that the panel wash and staining along with attaching the nose radome, that we've turned our collage of plastic pieces into something resembling a fighter jet. Before we continue with construction, let's apply the decals while it's still easy to maneuver the model around without breaking something off. Once again, we'll be using the Tamiya Mark Fit. As usual, apply a coat of the Mark Fit before applying the decal, position the emblem to the correct orientation, then roll a cotton swab over the decal to remove excess fluid and any air bubbles. I should note the alignment is fairly easy with all the panel lines available as reference points. However, the instruction guide has a few errors with incorrect orientation, placements, and decal scale compared to the actual model. I did not catch this right away, so a couple of my decals are a bit off from their ideal locations. After the decals have set, we can apply Tamiya Black Wash to highlight the panel lines and blend in the decal to the surrounding areas, while also removing that brand new look. We're ready again to add parts, starting with the underside AIM-9 Sparrow missiles. We follow on with the centerline external fuel tank. Next are the left main gear and doors, then the right main gear and doors. Continuing on, we attach both wing external fuel tanks. Our nose gear and door attachments complete our aircraft gear support. Last but not least, we add the AIM-7J Sidewinder missiles and their rails plus pylons. As always, we roll at 180 degrees to complete our final upper fuselage construction work. All we have left is to install our ejection seats and cockpit canopies. Before we add the glass, we'll even out the overall tone and reflectivity of the model by using a dull coat. Okay, we're about there. Stay tuned after the final showing of our F-4J Phantom for a look back at the 12 previous projects that have been completed. Take care, and we'll see you later.